Support for Palestinians appears to be growing, though. Hundreds of thousands of people held rallies today in places like Paris, London, Portland, and New York. They're demanding humanitarian protections for people living in Gaza. And joining us now to talk more about this conflict is Dr. Stephen Zunes. He is a professor of international studies at the University of San Francisco and a leading scholar on U.S. Middle East policy. Dr. Zunes, thanks for joining us tonight on Prime.
Be with you.
So here we are, 248 Palestinians dead, including 66 children, 12 Israelis dead, including a 5-year-old boy and a 16-year-old girl. Both Israel and Hamas now claiming victory. Is there a real winner on either side?
Not at all. You can no more win a war like this than you can win an earthquake. I mean, it was devastating. Of course, the terror that the Israelis felt with these rockets coming out, raining down on them, but far worse, of course, for those in the Gaza Strip with the enormous firepower on the Israelis, which tended to not really distinguish between military and civilian targets. And of course, the humanitarian consequences, both in terms of death toll and infrastructure damage, were enormous.
And on the Israeli side, Netanyahu appeared to be on the brink of losing power until this 11-day war broke out. And then on the other side, Hamas is gaining legitimacy in the eyes of many Palestinians. So it seems that the extremes on both sides have come out ahead.
Exactly. I mean, though you can't find a winner in terms of Israel versus Palestine, one could perhaps make the argument that it has strengthened the hardliners. I mean, when your country is being attacked, people tend to rally around the flag. It tends to reinforce the more hardcore elements that say that the other side cannot be trusted. The other side, you can't negotiate with them. The only way to respond is through force. And it has really hurt the Israelis and Palestinians, who very much would like to resolve the situation and have a settlement in which both Israeli Jews and Palestinian Arabs could have a state of their own with peace and security.
And a very troubling part of this conflict, which we've been covering, of course, have been the clashes between Arabs and Jews. They're spilling out onto the streets in Israel and other parts of the world, including here in the U.S., where we've seen a series of anti-Semitic attacks. Have you seen this before to this extent?
Well, certainly, people are being mobilized more. I mean, obviously, the anti-Semitic Israel's actions in the Gaza Strip, though I think most observers would say were excessive, are not the cause of the anti-Semitic attacks. They're the excuse. These are bigots that are trying to find any excuse to act out on their extreme views. And of course, that is deplorable, whatever one's belief is in terms of what constitutes a just resolution. But I think what we are seeing is that more and more Americans are questioning our government's blank check given to the Israeli government, though I think pretty much everybody agrees that Israel, like every country, has a right to self-defense. Most observers, and Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, other reputable human rights organizations have pointed this out, did engage, like Hamas, in what could be considered war crimes. And so there are questions as to whether the United States should put conditions on the aid, and whether we should have a policy of tough love, that is unconditional support for Israel's right to exist and right to self-defense, but question whether we should have the kind of unconditional support that has hallmarked the policies of both Republican and Democratic administration for decades now.
I wanted to talk to you about this because before the ceasefire, the U.S. had blocked a statement by the 15-member UN Security Council calling for a truce between Israel and Hamas. So if the U.S. is unconditionally standing with Israel, can our government be a neutral arbiter of this conflict?
Well, this is the underlying contradiction of the peace process from the beginning, because the United States is saying that we, not the United Nations and not the EU, not other parties, are the principal mediators of the conflict, while at the same time being the chief military and diplomatic supporter of one of the two parties. In fact, by far the more powerful of the two parties. And the approach is that the two sides need to work it out among themselves. I mean, even though, of course, like most people, I agree that both sides have equal rights to self-determination and security and that kind of thing. It ignores the gross asymmetry in power between the two sides. And And I think there needs to be some questioning of that, that whether the United States can maintain this dual role of trying to be essentially the sole mediator while continuing to give the kind of support we have been giving so far to the Netanyahu government, which more than most Israeli governments has been frankly more intransigent in terms of its willingness to make the necessary compromises for peace.
All right, Dr. Zinnes, we'll have to leave it there. We appreciate you being here on Prime with us tonight.
Oh, my pleasure.